all for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this important effort. The meeting is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the county's website. My name is Asha Flyer. I'm with Dudek, the consulting firm working with the County of Los Angeles staff on this update to the county's housing element. Today I have with me Sabrina Alonso, also from Dudek, Veronica Tam with Veronica Tam and Associates, and a few representatives from the Housing Policy section of the Department of Regional Planning from the County of Los Angeles. I have Tina Fung, Heather Anderson, Zoe Axelrod, Isla Scott, and Diana Gonzalez, who is present for Spanish translation. If you are in need of Spanish translation, please feel free to enter that into the chat box, which is located at the bottom of your screen, labeled chat. Diana, go ahead.
Buenos días a todos, me llamo Diana González y estoy aquí para ofrecer traducción al español. Si alguien ocupa traducción, por favor, indíquelo en el chat y así podamos ayudarlos. Gracias.
Great, thank you, Diana. And our presentation will be in two parts. The first part will be an overview of the project, and then we'll pause for some question and answer. And the second portion will be focused on the environmental public scoping meeting portion, which is relative to the preparation of the environmental impact report. All of the presentation slides are translated in Spanish. And as I mentioned, we have Diana here should you need further Spanish translation services. Thank you so much.
Welcome to this public scoping meeting for the Los Angeles County Housing Element Update. My name is Zoe Axelrod, and I'm with the Housing Policy section of the Department of Regional Planning. DRP performs all land use planning functions for the unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County, meaning the parts of the county that are not within any city. Those areas are shown in yellow on this map. The focus of the housing policy team is to increase housing choice, affordability, and livability in the unincorporated areas through land use and zoning regulations, and to support the county's broader efforts to address the housing and homelessness crisis. There are two goals of today's meeting. First, we want to give you some information about the housing element update and how you can be involved. Second, we want to hear from you about what types of environmental impacts you think we should study as we plan for housing in the unincorporated areas. Before I get into the details of what the housing element will include, we would like to give you some background on the current state of housing in the unincorporated areas. We'll follow that with an explanation of what the housing element does and our timeline for the project. We'll pause for questions, and then we'll provide an overview of the environmental impact report for the housing element update. You'll then have another opportunity to ask questions before we wrap up the meeting. Please only use the chat box for technical issues or to ask questions about the meeting itself. We're monitoring the chat box and will respond promptly. We ask that you please save all other questions for the Q&A sessions. It doesn't take a professional planner to see that we're in the middle of a housing and homelessness crisis in Los Angeles County. Housing is not available enough or affordable enough to meet the overall need. Rents have gone up in recent years. Many families have had to move because they can't afford the rent or can't afford to buy a home in LA County. It's common for adult children to move back in with their parents because they can't afford to rent or buy their own place in the neighborhood where they grew up. Homelessness is on the rise as well, with a 13% increase countywide between 2019 and 2020. These counts were completed before the COVID-19 pandemic, which has so far caused the highest unemployment rate in the county since the Great Depression, and which may indicate that the number of people experiencing homelessness on any given night is growing even higher. In unincorporated LA County, there are almost 300,000 households. 43 of those households spend too much of their income on housing. There's a rule of thumb for understanding whether housing is affordable. It's how much of your income goes to your housing costs. If you're spending more than 30% of your income on rent or mortgage costs, that's a sign that your housing may not be affordable. You may not have adequate money for other necessities such as transportation, food, or health-related costs. So in unincorporated LA County, 43% of households are considered housing cost burdened. Because of that, it's not uncommon for families to double up and overcrowd into housing that was not designed for that many people. One reason for high housing costs is a lack of supply to keep up with demand. There are more than 300,000 homes where people live in the unincorporated communities, including houses, apartment units, condos, and mobile homes. 77% of that housing is single-family homes. Neighborhoods with individual houses are an important source of housing, but that doesn't leave a lot of choices for people to find housing that fits their needs. The county needs a range of housing sizes and types, including apartments, townhouses, and condos, to meet the needs of different family types and incomes. Another telling statistic is that about 57% of the housing in unincorporated LA County is owner-occupied, compared to 46% in LA County as a whole. While we often associate high homeownership rates with neighborhood stability, we know that not everyone can afford to buy a home. So there's not enough housing, and the housing we do have doesn't match a lot of people's needs. Those needs are also changing. There are about 1 million people in unincorporated LA County. 13% of the population is age 65 and over. In just the past 10 years, the senior population grew by nearly 30%. The rise in the senior population has resulted in a demand for smaller, more affordable housing, accessible design, particularly for folks who have limited mobility, and supportive services. So how does the housing element address these issues? Since 1969, California has required local governments to have housing elements to ensure that every jurisdiction plans for its fair share of housing. The housing element is the county's housing policy guide for the unincorporated areas. It identifies housing needs and conditions and establishes the goals and policies that are the foundation of the county's housing strategy. It also identifies constraints and barriers to housing and includes an array of programs to ensure decent, safe, and affordable housing for current and future residents of the unincorporated areas, including those with special needs. The housing element must be submitted to the state every 8 years. The last housing element cycle was 2014 to 2021. The next one will cover the period from 2021 to 2029. Housing elements include several components. The foundation for the housing element is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, in which the state estimates each region's housing needs for the upcoming 8 years. State law requires cities and counties to plan for the estimated number of homes for current and future residents through land use and zoning regulations. The assigned allocation for the unincorporated areas for 2021 to 2029 is nearly 90,000 units, which is the largest number the county has ever had. As part of the housing element update, the county needs to show that there's enough land in the unincorporated areas where the 90,000 homes are allowed to be built under current land use and zoning regulations. This task is called the Adequate Sites Inventory. Sites included in this inventory must meet several requirements, including minimum allowable density, or the number of units allowed per acre. These sites also must be developable and have the potential for more homes to be built compared to what is currently on the ground. The county has completed the draft Adequate Sites Inventory, which shows that the county does not have enough land zoned for the 90,000 homes. As a result, state law requires the county to include a rezoning program in its housing element. The rezoning will ensure that there are enough sites with high enough allowable densities so that the 90,000 homes could be built in the upcoming 8 years. When deciding which sites to rezone, many factors are considered. Together, these factors address 2 questions. First, where should more housing, especially high-density multifamily housing types, such as apartments and townhouses, be built in the unincorporated areas? And second, how likely is a particular site to be available and suitable for housing development in the upcoming 8 years? When determining where to rezone to allow for more housing, especially high-density multifamily housing such as apartments and townhouses, the main goals are to encourage infill development in urbanized areas and to prioritize public health, safety, and equity. Sites in environmentally sensitive or hazardous areas such as the coastal zone, fire hazard severity zones, significant ecological areas, and hillside management areas will not be selected for rezoning, as these areas are not suitable for higher density development. Sites that are outside of environmentally sensitive or hazardous areas are then prioritized based on additional locational criteria. Sites that are located near transit, amenities, and services, and within areas served by existing infrastructure, such as public water and sewer systems, are considered more suitable for higher density development and thus rezoning. Also, historic discriminatory land use and housing policies have resulted in disadvantaged communities with concentrated poverty. To encourage diverse, inclusive, and mixed income neighborhoods, sites that are located in areas with more resources and opportunities in terms of educational attainment, employment, and economic mobility as identified by the state are also prioritized for rezoning. Per state law, sites that are included in the rezoning program must be available and suitable for housing development during the upcoming 8 years. If a site is not vacant, additional factors are considered to determine whether the site will likely be available for more housing in the upcoming 8 years. For example, we consider the age of the existing buildings. The older the buildings, the more likely it is that the owner will want to replace them. A property owner is also more likely to redevelop the site with a more intense use, like multifamily housing, if the land is more valuable than the existing improvement. Sites that are or have been contaminated, such as gas stations, often require a lot of money and time for cleanup. These sites are unlikely to be available and suitable for housing development in the near future. Another consideration is whether the proposed land use and zoning regulations would allow substantially more housing on the site than what is currently allowed. While we do not yet have a final list of sites that will be rezoned, it's important to note that all rezoning must take place between 2021 and 2024. The land use and zoning changes will be included in various pending and upcoming community and area planning efforts. After a housing element is complete, the county must submit it to the state for review. The housing element is either accepted by the state or sent back for revisions. After the housing element is accepted, each jurisdiction must report to the state annually on its progress toward meeting its share of the regional housing need. Here's our timeline for the housing element. We'll be releasing the draft housing element and environmental impact report for public comment this spring, and we'll start the public hearing process this summer. The state will certify the housing element at the end of this year or early next year. Here's some information about how to contact our team about the housing element via our website, where we have information and a survey you can take. You can email us general comments and questions, as well as your comments about what types of environmental impacts should be studied as part of the housing element. You can also provide us with your email address, and we'll make sure you'll be notified with updates about outreach meetings and draft documents. We're available to visit community groups at their standing meetings as well. Now we would like to pause for 10 minutes and see if anyone has any questions for us. We know this is a lot of information to digest. As a reminder, we'll also have time for questions later in today's meeting. Please use the raise your hand button to speak. To find the raise your hand button, click on the participants button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. In the participants box that opens, you'll see the raise your hand button in the bottom right corner.
Okay, thank you. So now I am monitoring this screen, and if anybody has any questions, please do feel free to raise your hand and you'll be allowed to speak, as Zoe mentioned. Or you can also use the Q&A box if you prefer to add any questions, and we are available to respond. We did have one question from a panelist confirming if the slideshow will be posted on the regional planning website. Yes, it will be made available. Okay, I have one hand raised here. Tracy Costin, I'll go ahead and unmute you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thank you, Tracy.
I'm Tracy Costin. I'm a resident in Acton. I also work for our local newspaper here. My question, and I don't know if you're able to answer this now or if it'll be in the draft, but which areas are you looking at in the rural areas? Because, for instance, in Acton, we don't have resources here. For example, for the homeless, we don't have bus transportation. We don't have a community center that can house. We don't have doctors here. We are really set apart from other areas. Even though we border Palmdale and Santa Clarita, we don't have those resources here for homeless. So my concern is, I think they briefly touched upon areas that they would not build on, areas with SEAs and public health and equity issues. We have a lot of SEA issues here in Acton already. So when will we find out which areas in particular that you're looking to do this? Because this is of great concern for us out here when we don't have those resources for people. So.
Thank you so much. We are still early in the process, and I'll let one of the county staff speak to your area specifically if they have any information or responses at this time. But I did want to mention that the housing element update is a planning document, and so it's not going to actually construct or build anything. It's more of the facilitation process and the planning and land use and zoning to allow for it. So I did want to just make that clarification, but I will go ahead and pass it along to the county to see if anybody has any further details for you.
Hi Tracy, this is Tina Fung with Regional Planning. So just a few things. One is kind of what Esha was saying earlier, that the housing element is a planning document, so we don't build anything as a county. What I guess you're asking specifically, because part of the presentation we were talking about a rezoning program, because we are assigned to this number, 90,000 units, that we have to show the state that we have the sufficient land to accommodate the development of those 90,000 units in the next 8 years. And so to answer your question, regarding the rezoning program, I actually do not think we are proposing any rezoning in the Antelope Valley because of the factors you just mentioned. Because we did look at environmental sensitive areas, and the Antelope Valley has a lot of those, as well as the hazardous areas, and fire risk, for example, is a big one. And also, again, amenities and services is very important too. And so in regards to the rezoning, because of all these constraints that we know of in the Antelope Valley, I do not believe we are proposing any rezoning in the Antelope Valley. However, Antelope Valley has its own challenges and housing needs as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so the housing element has actually many components. The adequate size inventory or the rezoning program is just one of the components. Other components of this planning document includes goals and policies and a series of implementation programs. So implementation programs basically is, once we identify the needs in the county and we have sort of, what we want to achieve through the goals, then the implementation programs are more like plans of actions. What can the county do to address these needs? And so, some of the implementation programs have to do with, say, updating land use regulations, but other programs could be, more like the financial side. What can the county do? And it's not just, this is not just a regional planning document, by the way. Many county agencies are also our partners in this progress. For example, we have the LA County Development Authority is one of our very important partners. We also have, the health department, Parks and Rec department, because once you're talking about, more people, more housing, you also need to look at their the needs in terms of amenities, right? So Public Works with the infrastructure, and Parks and Rec with the recreational facilities, things like that. So, so to answer your question, while we are not gonna propose rezoning in the Antelope Valley because of the constraints, it doesn't mean that Antelope Valley doesn't have its own unique needs and challenges when it comes to housing needs. And so the document is supposed to be comprehensive and try to address the needs of different segment of the population, whether it's people with special needs, senior citizens, single parent households, etc. So I hope I answer your question. And like what we showed you earlier during the presentation on the timeline, we do plan to have our draft in the spring. And so by the spring, I'm thinking more like around April, we should be able to show you the list of all the implementation programs, but also, maps regarding, where the county will propose the rezoning, if you need that kind of detail. But at this point, I'm pretty sure because of the constraints that we talked about, we are not proposing rezoning in the Antelope Valley.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tracy and Tina.
Sorry. Hi, Tracy. Thanks for your question. I would also just like to add on to that I know that we have a lot going on. I want to clarify that the housing element and in particular the rezoning program is separate from the housing ordinances that we also have going on, right? So we have still the by right housing ordinance, the interim and supportive housing ordinance, and the affordable housing preservation ordinance, which all of which have been approved at the board and are waiting to go back on consent. But those are separate than what we're talking about here with the housing element. And really the rezoning program is specifically talking about looking for areas for multifamily housing, which is different. I want to clarify too, more specifically, it's different than, say, shelters for people experiencing homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I'll also add that we do have a slide that comes a little later that talks a little bit more about all the opportunities for public outreach. And Tracy will have the contact information for you as well. And if you're interested in being on the interested parties list, you can add yourself to that, and then you'll be receiving communications throughout the process.
Okay.
And when the document is available for public review, it will be available on the website to everyone. And if you're on the interested parties list, then you'll receive an email about that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I'll just pause for another couple seconds here to see. Oh yes, we have another one here. Okay. Go ahead. Please state your name first.
Good morning. My name is Ines Chesum. I am an architect. I'm part of the Land Use Committee of La Crescenta Valley. And this is my greatest concern, that the communities are not being looked at specifically as you do the planning. What we have here happening in our communities is lots that have been underdeveloped or that have remained vacant for many, many years, all of a sudden are taking advantage of the density bonus ordinance, and developers are coming in and proposing development. The fear in the community is a destruction of a community as we see it. And in some aspects it's real, and in some other aspects it's not. This is sort of my main concern. We did have the beginnings of a forum with Laura Friedman's office trying to specifically look at what the housing needs were for our community. It was a very brief thing. This was just at the beginning of the pandemic, so it kind of came to a halt. But in a matter of a few weeks, a representative from her office determined that in our community there was really no homelessness per se, and that the greatest need was for housing for our young professionals, families that have lived here for a long time, their children going to college or to trade school, whatever, starting their own families and trying to remain within the community, and there's no place for them. My sense is that we went through a period of mansionization where homes became huge, very large, and very expensive. So it started becoming that they were out of reach for most of our young families. So they had to go look elsewhere. The proposed housing that we have right now facing our community is a very big development that's getting bonuses because they're adding affordable housing. Yet most of the multifamily units that they're proposing are large 3-bedroom units. Well, that's really not filling the need that we have in our community, because who's going to be able to afford the rent of these 3-bedroom units? So I guess my request is that if there's a density bonus, it needs to be more specific. That if it says, okay, you get this bonus, but maybe you have to have a certain percentage of units that are, in my day, and I'm old, there used to be a lot of efficiency units, which single people or a couple could go live in a very minimal kind of situation, afford the rent, and use it as a stepping stone to go on to a small home and maybe a bigger home as the family grew. We have pretty much eliminated that process of allowing people to have stepping stones. It would be great in our community if we had, planning should be able to ascertain what these needs are. If we have efficiency units, our kids, even college kids can go live there, have, amenities, have open space, have a community center, and have a small place to live that they can afford. And again, I think I'm just repeating myself, but I really would hope that you would engage the town councils, the land use committees, people that are involved in our communities and understand them. If you have a public forum, I think we get people, for the most part, what we've experienced is fear of losing what they have and what they see they have worked for. And really, this should not be about that. It should be about providing homes that are needed for the needs of really the whole county. I mean, the fact that we have 57% unoccupied residences tells me that those are unoccupied because they're beyond the economic reach of those who would like to move into those homes. And if we continue to build homes that are out of the reach of affordability, then we can build 90,000, we could build 100,000.
Thank you so much. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, not to cut you off. We just have to make sure that we do get through the rest of the presentation. Thank you so much for your comments. I really appreciate it. That's really good feedback. I will allow just one more minute if staff did want to respond to any of that. Otherwise, we'll continue with the presentation.
Hi Inez, thank you for those comments. It's very helpful. I do just want to point out that the 57% statistic wasn't about units being unoccupied. It was about residential units being owner occupied. So we don't have 57% vacancy rate. It's about 57% of units being occupied by the owner of those homes. But thank you for your comments, and as we mentioned at the top, as Asha mentioned at the top, we're happy to visit, Zoe mentioned that in the presentation, we're happy to visit community groups, so we're happy to come visit Crescenta Valley Town Council and hear more about your specific needs in the community. And I do want to mention that our draft implementation programs list includes a program to figure out a way to, if there's a way that we can help incentivize development of micro units or efficiency units. So we are aware that that's a need in the county, and we're hoping, and with our work program in the next housing element cycle of the next 8 years, to really figure out a way to help develop and encourage development of those units.
Thank you both. Great dialogue. Thank you. Great comments. I am going to go ahead and continue with the second part of our presentation, but at the close, we'll have another opportunity for questions and answers. The second part of the presentation is more focused on the environmental, and so I'll go ahead and begin. Thank you.
This part of the meeting will be focused on the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, scoping portion of the project. At the close of this presentation, you're welcome to comment on either the environmental scoping and/or the project information that was presented earlier. The purpose of the scoping meeting is to inform the public and responsible agencies that an EIR will be prepared for this project, provide information on the EIR project process, and seek input on the potential environmental impacts that may result from the project. The input gathered today, along with submitted written comments provided during the 30-day public review scoping period, will be utilized to develop the scope and content of the EIR, including the identification of issues of concern or areas of potential controversy. This information is used by the county's decision makers as part of the deliberative process in approving or denying a project. Please note that the environmental document itself does not recommend approval or denial of a project. For the EIR process, the County of Los Angeles is identified as the lead agency. The county has hired a consultant, Dudek, to assist in the preparation of the EIR. Dudek's project manager, Asha Blyer, is present today to help answer any questions. As the lead agency, the county is mandated to fulfill the following requirements under CEQA. Disclose significant environmental effects and means to reduce, avoid, and minimize those impacts. Present discussion of a reasonable range of alternatives. Provide the public an opportunity to comment on the project's potential for environmental impacts. And provide an EIR that gives decision makers a solid basis for a sound decision on the project. Potential impacts to be studied in the EIR are shown here. I'll take a pause to allow some time to review all of these issue areas. Please note that these are the issue areas which will be considered in the EIR, but it does not necessarily mean that there will be impacts associated with all of these issue areas. We have yet to conduct the analysis to determine what impacts will result from the project. If you see that there is something specific relative to these issue topics that you would like us to consider, or issues that are not already included in this list, please feel free to use the chat box or provide your comments at the close of this presentation. A forthcoming slide will also explain how you can submit written comments during the public review period. This slide demonstrates the opportunities that will be available for public input. We're currently in the notice of preparation stage. There will be another opportunity for public comment once the draft EIR is prepared and distributed. This period will last a total of 45 days as required by the CEQA statute. Following the 45 days public review period, we will work to respond to public comments and make any necessary revisions to the EIR. There will be another 10-day review period of the responses to comments and the final EIR. Lastly, during the hearings, as decision makers consider project approval and certification of the EIR, there will be another opportunity for public comment. This slide shows how you can submit your written comments either via email or mail. Written comments are due by February 4th, 2021. Please be sure to include your name, address, and phone number on all written comments. We would like to thank you again for joining us today. We appreciate your participation in this important effort. We'll close out today's presentation with another 10-minute Q&A session. Again, please use the Raise Your Hand button to speak. To find the Raise Your Hand button, click on the Participants button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. In the Participants box that opens, you will see the Raise Your Hand button in the bottom right corner.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us today and listening to our presentation. And we'll now open it up for more Q&A. We really welcome any comments or considerations you have relative to the project, but also relative to the environmental scope. We haven't yet begun our analysis on the project itself, but you can see from the previous slides the issue topics that we'll plan to cover and we'll plan to look at. And in the future, we'll be identifying what, if any, significant project impacts there are. I did want to mention that if you would like to submit a NOP scoping comment, we are taking those in writing, so we're happy to discuss verbally as well. But if you want to submit a comment that will be included in the public record, we will need to get that in writing. And so you can see here there's an email address and a mailing address, as Zoe mentioned. And also feel free to use our Q&A box as well to enter any questions that we'll be happy to answer, or comments relative to the environmental scripting. So we'll just take a pause and open up the floor to anyone who wishes to share. So I'm monitoring the chat box, the Q&A, as well as a participants box if you raise your hand. I'm not seeing anything yet, but we'll go ahead and wait another minute or so to make sure that in case you're typing, or if you need a little time to just process all that information. I know it was a lot of information. And while we're waiting, I'll also just encourage you all, well, first of all, thank you for being here today on a Saturday, and also encourage you to share the information with anyone that you think may be interested. You know, the public participation is such an important piece of this planning and environmental effort. And as we mentioned, the presentation will be made available on the county's website. So anyone will be able to view it at their convenience. Okay, I don't see any questions or raised hands. I'll turn it over to the county staff if they have any other or closing remarks they'd like to make.
Thank you, Asha, and thank you everybody for attending this meeting on a Saturday morning. So as we mentioned earlier, we are planning to have our draft housing element in the spring. And so if you think that it will be helpful for us to attend one of your community groups standing meeting, so that we can also share the information with other community members who aren't able to join us today, please go ahead and contact us. As you can see on the screen right here, it's easiest to contact us right now through email because of the pandemic. But yeah, we are more than happy to join your community group's meeting to provide more information on this effort. And thank you again. If you have further information, you can also visit our website. We periodically update our website whenever we have recorded, meeting we record like today, or any PowerPoint presentations. We also have a housing survey on that website. You're welcome to fill out that survey and let us know your thoughts about, what you think the county needs to do to help address the different housing needs of the people in the county unincorporated areas. And yeah, thank you again for attending. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Tina. And I do have one participant in the chat box that had inquired about the EIR comment period. And we responded that the EIR comment period is 45 days. They did also ask that perhaps it should be 60 days. So I did just want to respond to that the CEQA statute, so per the state law, they do require the 45-day public review period, but your comment will be considered, and we appreciate your participation today and your comments. I have another question. How many people joined the presentation today? So it looks like we have about 10 attendees. I think we were pretty consistent throughout the presentation. We do find that a lot of people will view the presentation at a later time. We had more registrants than who actually attended today. So they will be able to view the presentation at their convenience, and we hope that you'll share it with people that may be interested. And then Peter Gutierrez did also mention the 45-day public review period is the minimum. The statute does not prohibit a longer period. And yes, that is correct. So we will certainly consider your request. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I think we can go ahead and close the meeting. And again, we really appreciate all your time and the great feedback and comments and dialogue that we were able to have today. And we look forward to more participation in the future. And with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.